Well, today we are talking about one of the biggest UFO conspiracies in history, the one that really stemmed it all, Roswell. Get right into it.
As James said, the Roswell incident is arguably the most famous UFO crash in history, although the government would claim otherwise. Basically, on June 24th of 1947, while searching for a crashed military aircraft, pilot Kenneth Arnold spotted 9 UFOs flying over the Cascade Mountains of Washington state in the US. The objects were flying in formation at a height of about 10,000 feet and a speed of approximately 1,900 kilometers per hour, which was not possible at the time, for humans that is. Kenneth described the way the objects moved as jerky, like rocks skipping over the water, flashing forward at strange intervals. When the media got a hold of the story, they coined the phrase flying saucer, and the UFO craze took off at hyperspeed, especially when on July 7th, a local rancher named Mac Brazel called the sheriff to let him know that one of those objects had somehow ended up on his farm, and this came to be known as the Roswell incident.
It was back in July of 1947 that something strange happened near Roswell, New Mexico. Something had crashed into the ground, into Brazel's farm. There were metal pieces, rubber strips, and a strange tin foil-like material. The nearby Roswell Army airfield was alerted. The military came out and collected the debris. At first, they issued a press release saying they had recovered an unknown flying disc. This really got people talking, but just a day later the Army changed their story, saying it was actually just a weather balloon. Now, while some of the public took this at face value, it caused some controversy, especially in the years to come. People started to believe that the military was covering up something much bigger, possibly an alien spacecraft crash. Over the years, people started to come forward claiming to have seen the wreckage, and not only were there strange markings on the material described by some as hieroglyphics, but the material was incredibly strong and seemed to almost be impossible to burn. Oh, and of course, people who'd been called to the site to recover the material claimed to have seen bodies that were clearly not human. Over the years, many people have questioned the official explanation for this incident. Even former military personnel and locals said they saw strange things at the crash site, like debris that didn't look like it came from any known aircraft, and even small bodies that didn't seem human. In 1994, the US Air Force released a report saying the debris was from a top secret project called Project Mogul, a project that used high altitude balloons to detect Soviet nuclear tests. They said the unusual materials found were just parts of these balloons and their sensors, but this explanation didn't satisfy everyone. In 1997, on the 50th anniversary of the incident, the Air Force released another report to address the claims about these alien bodies. They said these were actually just crash test dummies used in military experiments, not extraterrestrial beings. But again, a lot of people were and still are highly skeptical of this. The Roswell incident happened less than 2 years after the atomic bombs were dropped on Japan in 1945. Those bombs were created through a secret project that lasted 3 years and had 3 main sites, including one in New Mexico. So if the government could keep the atomic bomb a secret for so long, why wouldn't they be able and willing to hide information about a crashed UFO landing? Plus, little mannequins? I think most people would look at that and be able to tell the difference between an alien and a crash test dummy.
So this foreign object that landed on Mac Brazel's farm actually did so a few days prior to him calling into the sheriff's department. To be honest, he hadn't thought much of it until he started reading about Kenneth Arnold, flying saucers, and UFOs in the papers. Once he learned about the possible presence of technologically advanced ships with no known origin that likely came from outer space, he began to wonder if that was in fact what had landed on his farm just a few nights ago. And so he gathered up some of the debris and took them down to the local police station. In response, the sheriff immediately contacted the nearby army base, and soon intelligence officer Jesse Marcel had arrived on the scene and instructed Brazel to take him to the crash site so that the two could collect more debris. So let's talk about Jesse Marcel, the first military officer to step foot on the scene of the crash, because apparently Jesse had a lot to say, according to his son Jesse Jr., who went on to tell his father's story after his death in 19 1986. According to Jesse Jr., in 1947, when he was just 10 years old, his father woke him up in the middle of the night, excited after having visited the crash site. Jesse Jr. sat up as Jesse Sr. handed him some of the debris he had collected earlier that day on Brazel's farm, and he told Jesse Jr. to get a good look because the debris were something that he would never see again. They were not of this earth, and the pair simply could not make sense of them. Out of all of the debris his father had brought home, Jesse Jr. said that the one that fascinated him most was a small beam with purple-hued hieroglyphics. I suppose it's not difficult to see why the pair didn't believe the government when they released a report saying that what had been found on the Brazel's farm was nothing more than a discarded weather balloon. But of course, you don't mess with the government. And so for years, both Jesse Jr. and his father kept quiet about what they had seen. That is until in the late 1970s, a man named Stanton Friedman showed up asking questions. Stanton T. Friedman, a nuclear physicist turned ufologist, tracked down Jesse Sr. after being tipped off that a retired military man might know something about the Roswell incident, something that had been kept from the public for the past 31 years. And it turns out he did. Jesse Sr. told Freeman that the weather balloon story had in fact been a cover-up, and that the original wreckage had been replaced with a weather balloon shortly after military personnel first arrived on the scene. Not only that, but Jesse claimed that despite what their superiors had wanted them to believe, it was incredibly clear to everyone working on the site that the object had in fact been an extraterrestrial spaceship with outstanding craftsmanship and incredibly advanced out-of-this-world technologies. Although, unfortunately, Jesse did claim that he never got to witness the alleged aliens inside of the craft being pulled out, but still, he's ex-military, he was there. It's a pretty compelling case if you ask me.
There are also witnesses aside from Brazel's claiming to have seen some strange things. So many of these witnesses stayed silent for years, but eventually began speaking out to close friends or family about what they'd seen, still fearing repercussions from the government. There was another crash site about 40 miles from Brazel's ranch where more wreckage and alien bodies were said to be being recovered. A firefighter who went to this site claimed that he saw a large disc in the ground and several small, non-human bodies nearby. He said that military officials told him to keep quiet about what he saw. Sergeant Melvin Brown also shared his experience. He said he rode in a truck with the bodies from the crash site to Roswell Field and then stood guard at the hangar where they were first kept. He was instructed not to look under a tarp, but he got curious and he peeked. He claimed he saw 2 alien bodies. The government has always denied his claims, but several people who were there or knew people who were there have said they saw wreckage and bodies arrive at Wright Field. Retired General Arthur Exon stated that a top secret committee was set up to oversee the investigation of this and other classified UFO incidents. After the Roswell crash, the debris was secretly flown from Fort Worth, Texas to Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. At Wright Field, Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Exon, who later became the base commander, recalled that some of the material was very thin, but incredibly strong. And it wasn't just metal that arrived at Wright Field either. At the second crash site a few miles from the first, they discovered a smaller, more intact craft and 4 bodies lying nearby. These bodies did not look human. Again, according to witnesses, the bodies were described as being in fairly good condition despite having been exposed for 6 days. Some parts of the bodies have been chewed on by animals. Descriptions from those who saw the bodies are pretty consistent. They were said to be 4 to 5 feet tall, with big heads, large eyes, and small mouths. Basically your classic idea of an alien. They had thin bodies with long arms and 4 fingers. An army nurse who worked on the initial autopsy described how fragile the skulls and bones were too. The bodies were quickly placed in large, sealed wooden crates, loaded onto a B-29 bomber and flown to Fort Worth before being sent to Wright Field.
Now, the general public weren't the only ones concerned with the Roswell crash. In fact, one of the highest members of government was too, the president, which at the time was Harry S. Truman. After the incident took place, Truman became increasingly interested and concerned with UFOs, so much so that in 1948 he called a meeting with his military aide, Colonel Robert Laundrie, in the Oval Office to discuss UFO reports and what they might mean for the security of the country. Laundrie told Truman that, quote, quote, all manner of objects and things were being seen in the sky by people as of late, which only led the president to worry more about the possibility of new, never-before-seen threats to the American people. And so Truman ordered a quarterly oral report from both Laundrie and the Air Force to be presented to him at the White House to discuss whether or not the UFO sightings would present any kind of immediate danger. Although neither the military or the Air Force were ever able or willing to provide Truman with any answers, the UFO sightings kept coming and officials became more and more confused. To this day, it's unclear what information the government has gathered on UFOs, but what we do know is that if they do in fact have concrete evidence supporting the existence of alien life forms, they sure as heck aren't sharing it with us. Yet, fingers crossed.
The Roswell incident was the catalyst for pretty much every modern UFO conspiracy today. Before Roswell, the idea of aliens was just that, really, an idea. But when stories about this mysterious crash hit the papers, it really changed the public's view of the possibility of alien life forever. Suddenly, what people had read about in science fiction and fantasy novels or watched on the big screen was something a lot more concrete. Project Blue Book formed a few years after the Roswell incident, a genuine Air Force program dedicated to investigating UFOs, at least in the early days. Area 51, the mysterious Men in Black, Majestic 12, all of these things started being whispered about in the years following the Roswell incident. Something I want to ask all of you out there, what do you want to see us talk about next? Your suggestions down there in the comments.
We'll be sure to check it out.
Catch
Cheers.
you next time.